All right, well, hello and welcome to a very special edition of Desert Island Drams, right from the banks of Loch Fyne. Today joins me Mr. David Smillie from Wemyss Malts. Of course, we're going to have the usual chat about a couple of things about the industry and, of course, the three drams that Dave would take to a remote location such as this, but a bit more sand, a bit more islandy. So this is obviously a new medium, so this could go wrong at any point, but we're hoping for the best. So firstly, Dave, welcome, and Slange. So Dave works for Wemyss Malts, which have a distillery, but a big important part of their business is independent bottling, which we talked about this week in a post. I guess, Dave, I want to ask you, like, what do you see independent bottlers playing a role in the industry in the next little while as it continues to evolve and change?
I think it's really interesting because we talked about this the other week, and the role that independent bottlers play, that, based on my knowledge, is that when there's the peaks and troughs of whisky production, and obviously the kind of whisky lock of the 80s, I've been told by people more knowledgeable than me that independent bottlers kept an awful lot of the industry afloat by buying and releasing and distributing whisky in a way that maybe those distilleries hadn't been able to while they could in their own bottlings. But I think in the future, I think it's really interesting. For example, we've got a glass here, which we'll talk about in a sec, I think, is that Indies are really good at taking to market drams that aren't accessible through another medium. So, for example, Wemyss released Black Gold, which was a Bowmore cask for essentially a members club from Wemyss, and a bottle that's probably Desert Island that's literally like sherry cask, like 30 plus year old. Bowmore is probably going to be one of the three drams. If I was going to try and pick one drink for the rest of my life, I would afford it. Definitely do that, but I think it's the interest, it's the interesting casting and interesting releases that I think you and me come back to Indies for.
Yeah, I think, and what we are drinking is what we mentioned this week in a post, which is the James Edie Ben Rennis, the 11-year-old, and it's a 59.9% single cask. It's a 36-month finish in Oloroso.
I didn't know it was that strength.
And it's and I think the thing is, Ben Rennis is owned by Diageo, and Diageo aren't going to bother their arse to make a Ben Rennis release at that strength in a single cask, and especially not at that affordability, because they've got much bigger fish to fry, which is fair enough. But I think independent bottlers fill that gap where the owners of the distilleries either wouldn't or simply couldn't because the market isn't there for them.
There's the geek aspect to it as well, because I think Ben Rennis as well is one of these tubby worm tub distilleries that have got a lot of interest because they add a lot of texture and a lot of kind of body to blended whiskey, which still makes up a huge part of Scotch sales across the world. And there's interest because of the kind of mouth-filling character of them. But as you say, Ben Rennis Flora and Fauna is pretty much the only official release.
Yeah, the 15-year-old. Yeah.
Which is delicious. But
yeah.
As I say, I've, through other independent bottlers, tried different styles of Ben Rennis. That, for example, like this is a sherry Oloroso
finish. Yeah.
Finish. But also ones that are just bourbon cask. And I think a really good example of that was my old employers, which was Tiki Whiskey, had a 14-year-old Dalmore that was just bourbon cask. So it was like really, compared to official bottlings, which is like quite sherry and that's the style. But it was just bourbon cask and it was like fresh and like green apple and all that kind of style that you don't think of when you think of Dalmore. So it kind of gives you, as a geek or enthusiast, it gives you a window into the house, like the house style, as opposed to maybe the maturation process.
Yeah, and I guess the style that's branded as being the way, this is the way we mature, but that doesn't mean it's the only way it can be matured. And you know that 15-year-old Ben Rennis is all sherry cask, all be refill sherry, whereas this is finished in first fill, which is obviously changes the game again.
There's a lot of bourbon character, there's a lot of like that kind of coconutty.
Yeah, so you're probably 8 years American oak and 3 years, which makes it quite an interesting dram. And obviously, drinking in a place like this does help quite a lot.
It's got to be 60% pretty much for me to smell it, because obviously the loch's quite.
It smells a bit
sea-ish.
So there's the other side to what you have now on Wemyss and all that is you have a distillery. You have Kingsbarns, which is obviously a very young distillery comparatively, and its kind of inaugural release was. Or its main release is it's a Dream to Dram, which is 3 years old or thereabouts. So we're talking about younger whiskey than kind of a lot of people historically be used to drinking as single malt, and obviously you're talking about a distillery without that history yet. You know, it can't compete with that history and provenance that we're so used to of 150, 200 years. How do you feel new and kind of more modern distilleries feature in what is already a populated and established Scotch landscape?
I think it's really interesting. It's a really interesting question because, especially something I've had to learn maybe over the last 6 to 8 months was there is a big raft of new distilleries that have been born over the last 10 years, I think. People say that Kilcoman's was the last of the old guard, and any kind of new Scotch distillery since then is kind of part of this new wave. And talk about Kingsbarns, it's definitely about the liquid is very much, I think, in a traditional manner. Obviously, there's STR casks involved in the Dream to Dram, which is a process that's probably modern, but given obviously Jim Swan was part of the picking of the yeast strains and obviously the cask maturation process. It was definitely more of a modern thinking about getting lots of character into whiskey in a short period of time without using small barrels to give you a lot of flavour, but maybe not necessarily what would suit the spirit that they produce. You know, that kind of really fruity and kind of nutty spirit, I suppose, that comes off the sills of Kingsbarns. But the thing for me I get quite excited about now is I think Kingsbarns is really drinkable. The drinkability is really a big part of it. And, you know, for better or for worse, this is a drink. But the whole point of it is that we drink it. You know, we can be as geeky or as kind of far-thinking or think too much about it if we want, but at the end of the day, it's got to be consumed by people to make the business viable.
Well, you hope that's the point anyway.
Yeah, and that's the thing is there's an awful lot of influence that I've seen from new distilleries of releasing quite light, quite fruity, and maybe not doing what this is, which is using kind of sherry to add flavour in a way that is delicious, but obviously this is a kind of more mature spirit and it's part of a larger range. But the thing about Kingsbarns until 2 weeks ago, it's the start of August, we release essentially, it's sort of the Founder's Reserve, but it's essentially cask strength Kingsbarns Drink to Dram. But that's the first addition to the range. The official, we've done Founders releases, etc. But it's the first kind of addition as a yearly series to the Kingsbarns portfolio. But as one bottle, Dream to Dram's one release as opposed to Indies, is that it's got to be quite approachable. Especially when, as you say, it's not got the heritage of a Rennis, like Macallan or these kind of established brands that people go, that's quality. That's what I'm saying, is that branding or that kind of background is to do with, that's going to be good because it's got 100, 200 years of history. These young brands have to be approachable, I think, have to be approachable and drinkable, and they have to have enough quality people go back and buy a second bottle. Because that's the thing that even we talk about, is that a lot of people buy one bottle of whiskey, but if you can get somebody to buy the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, that's when you've got kind of momentum.
I think as well, when you talk about, marks like Macallan's a great example, or like the established islands like the Freud and whatnot. And I'm not singling any of them out, but those established distilleries can release a bad whiskey. And it's a blip. It's a small kind of, or even not even a bad whiskey, not interesting, or a whiskey that their followers don't like, or whatever. It's just a small kind of anomaly in a long history. Whereas for a young distillery, if your first or second release is not well received, then it's a huge blow. You're talking 50 to 100% of your output at the time.
It's even, I suppose, releasing bad whiskey, whatever that means, is a mistake. But producing bad whiskey from a distillery point of view, when you're that size, it's quite easy because you just blend it into a release. But when you've got a size of, off the top of my head, I just can't know what the production numbers are at Kingsbarns at the moment, but it's less than 200,000 litres a year. You're not producing that amount of spirit to be able to afford to make a mistake. That's why you've got to be, pure. The master distiller is very conscientious, so you understand exactly what you've got to be doing. He takes his time with it. It's slow fermentation, slow distillation, which you talk about, which add character. But you can't afford to, as you say, release bad whiskey, whatever that is, right? It's all subjective at the end of the day, I suppose. But I think, from my point of view, especially with young distilleries, I'd much rather taste the distillery character, as we said a second ago, rather than maybe have something from a new distillery that's kind of sherry dominated or quite oaky, or like the cask is influenced too much. Even though there's a lot of, especially SDR and the bourbon cask, there's influence there, but it's not dominant of the house style, I suppose.
It's distillery
characteristic. You have to learn what this house style is, so that when we do release a sherry cask, it might be happening this year, you can contrast and compare.
You can see where it is, and very well. And I know of the 3 people who watch this, a couple aren't that okay. When we talk about bad whiskey, it's like talking about a bad song. It's all subjective and it's all art and it's all kind of that. There's varying opinions, but when you talk about a bad song, it's almost something that the majority of people don't recognise as being something that they like. So I mean, there's nothing you can categorically say bad or good, but when we say bad whiskey, we mean that something that, in general, the whiskey world looks upon as being of a lesser quality and something that's not enjoyed by the most part. We talked about there about whiskey needing to be drunk. That's what it's for. And when I talk about things that annoy people in the industry, what we'll come back to again and again is whiskey that doesn't get drunk, because it's being collected and it goes into kind of people that it just gets turned around at auction and it just earns more money, but it doesn't actually get opened. So I guess we'll go to the next question, which is, Dave, what annoys you most about the whiskey or the drinks industry?
It's an interesting one. I think the overriding one for me, being a Scot who's made drinks in Scotland and is passionate for the whiskey industry, is that we don't consume enough of our national spirit in this country. A lot of it goes onto containers and goes to the States or goes to China and goes into other markets, which is a big part of the game. I understand that, but I think especially in Scotland, our reverence for our national spirit kind of trips us up into enjoying it. Like, we can talk an awful lot about cask finishing or cask strength or whatever else it is, but the drinkability of whiskies is something I hope that we kind of learn, because we talk an awful lot about like delicious blends or drinking whiskey or as opposed to thinking whiskey, and that's the thing. I suppose that if I was going to pick something, is that I would hope that, or I would like to, whiskey to be something that people order in nightclubs like they do in Taiwan and drink at the sit at the table with lots of green tea, right? That'd be, what could that happen here? It won't happen. Because there's a cultural difference, because we think, this stuff is rare, and it's beautiful. It's got a lot of effort into it. It's sat in a cask for a long time, but again, it's still drinking it. And that's maybe the thing that, if there was one thing about this industry, I'm like, that could be better. It's definitely that.
I think, and we are running out of time here, so I must ask the question on everyone's lips. If you were to end up on a desert island, with the likes of which we don't look like we're that far from at the minute, just over there, what would be the 3 drams that you would take with you to that?
3 drams is interesting. I'm glad you said that, because I didn't really know it was 3, because one's hard. I think, off the top of the bottle that I think is brilliant because it's consistent, you can get it pretty much anywhere, is probably Johnny Black label. Great in its own, great as a shot. I've worked in cocktail bars with that as a shot for a long time. Great with soda, great cocktails. It's the workhorse. It's a big workhorse from Uncle Diego that probably is a little bit of Ben Rennis in there. But that's definitely the one where, if I was going to think, what bottle of whiskey would you drink for the rest of your life and be, you could have it when you're sad, have it when you're happy, have it in celebration, all those kind of things, probably that. Secondary, going to single malt, is the dram that I look forward to if I see it at the bar is Clynelish 14. Again, consistent. That kind of, it's not tubby. It's kind of waxy. That waxy note I think is really delicious because it can coat your palate, and it's also got a pineapple-y kind of acidity
very
aspect
tropical,
to it. And that, with the connotations of the next bartender and the connection to pineapple, to hospitality, and all that kind of nonsense. It's definitely a dram that I go, that's delicious. Like even bad Clynelish, usually talking about bad whiskey, poor Clynelish are usually pretty delicious.
Yeah, Clynelish 14's happiness whiskey.
Yeah,
you take a sip and you enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's rarely disappointing. It's drinking whiskey, but it's definitely something that's I enjoy. And then the last one is probably a baller dram, so it would be a really old Bowmore. It would be like a black Bowmore or a really old sherry 30+ Bowmore, because
some of the old 1960s, again, very tropical spirit, lightly peated.
Black Bowmore's about 30 grand a bottle or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Mental.
That's your desert island, mate.
Exactly, I can do the fucking one.
But the first person to pick something up over about 200 quid.
But it's definitely, it's one of those, because we had a pretty old Bowmore over there for your stag, and I sat there with the big man and me and we looked out onto the sound and had like a bit of a moment with it.
Yeah. And
Bowmore's definitely the distillery in Ireland that I revere probably the most as well, because of the complexities at that age. I've never had I've had 30-year-old plus Lefroy and been like, that's delicious.
Yeah, but the Bowmore is
about it,
the Bowmore's a golden age.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's us within 30 seconds of Instagram's time limit. Yes. So thanks, Dave. Slán Javan, mate.
Cheers.
Cheers all.